Let us start tonight's session with a short 3-minute video by Max. Why trust the Bible?
The question is often asked, both of the Christian and by the Christian. On what basis can we rely on and trust the Bible? Where is the historical credibility for the Christian Bible? And of course, if we can establish the credibility of the Bible, then a number of other questions that relate to the Christian faith and the Christian worldview are dealt with and or fall away. So how do we test the credibility of the Bible? Well, we test its credibility in the same way that we would test the credibility of any historical document. It's a process called textual criticism that's used widely in academic circles, in history and ancient history. And it basically involves two broad approaches, two broad categories of test. The first is to find out how many of the early manuscripts we have of a particular text, because then we can check them against each other and we can see whether they've been doctored or changed over time. We can see whether the integrity of the original text has actually been preserved. Secondly, how close to the historical events that the text depicts were those early manuscripts? How early can we date them? And when it comes to various figures and writers throughout human history, textual criticism has been applied and it's been relied on and it's been proved to be very, very effective. Let's take the example of the great Greek philosopher Plato. There's no real question about whether or not Plato existed or what he wrote or the substance of what he wrote. When we look at the works of Plato, we see that we have 7 copies of the early manuscripts of Plato, and we can date them to within around 900 years of Plato's life. And through textual criticism, that's considered acceptable. Take another Greek writer, the writer Homer, responsible for the Odyssey, the Iliad, and various other well-known works. When it comes to Homer, we have 643 of the early manuscripts, and we can date them to within around 500 years of the life of Homer. Far, far more manuscripts and far, far closer to Homer's time of actually writing them. And then we look at the New Testament of the Bible, and we have more than 20,000 of the early manuscripts, some of which can be dated to within 100 years of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. On any measure, when we look at it through the eyes of the scholarly and academic world, through the processes of textual criticism, the Christian Bible, and specifically the New Testament of the Christian Bible, is the most historically reliable and verifiable document we have in ancient history. If you'd like more information on this, check out this video from my friend and colleague Amy Orr-Ewing, and connect with us for more opportunities to have your questions answered, for more video responses and forums online too.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that very interesting video. This video is part of a series of short videos entitled Small Talk that is free to download. These videos are short, but they are powerful. I'm sure you agree, as they help to give you good answers to some of the tough questions and topics. I will make available the links through emails to all of you. Otherwise, you can always look up Max in YouTube and you will be able to see these videos for you to download. They are great material for you to use in your church as well for small group discussion. Besides the video, by the way, we have also prepared questions to accompany each of these videos, which we can freely send to you for you to use in your small group discussions, okay? Let me invite Max to add a few comments on this important topic of why trust the Bible. Hi, Max.
Hi, KY. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks for the kind invitation and the very kind introduction. It's always a pleasure to be partnering with you guys, with the HKCCA, and my first time partnering with my friend, Andrew Loke, which I'm really blessed to be able to do as well. So thank you, brother, for joining. Look, I think this question of why we should trust the Bible is a really important question because Christians a lot of the time have a tendency to just say things like, because the Bible says so, when people ask very reasonable questions. And, I studied and practiced law for some time before I moved into politics. And I know in a courtroom, you could never get away with the kind of circular reasoning by just pointing at something and saying, that's why we believe it, without actually establishing first the credibility of the Bible itself. But I just wanted to speak very briefly about where the credibility and historical legitimacy of the Bible should fit in to a broader search for truth and the broader body of evidence for the Christian message and the message of Jesus. Yuri Gagarin, who was the first ever human being in space, when he came back, of course, he was representing an aggressively atheistic regime, the USSR. And in his press conference upon returning to Earth, he was an international celebrity. And he said something along the lines of, by the way, for those of you who are stupid enough to still believe in God, I can confirm for you that he does not exist because I went into space, I went into the heavens, and I couldn't find him there. And the next day, C.S. Lewis, the great Christian thinker, the Oxford professor, and the great apologist, he wrote a letter to the editor, something that was published globally in newspapers and in magazines. He said, for Yuri Gagarin to say that the God doesn't exist because he couldn't find him up in space is as ridiculous as Shakespeare's character Hamlet saying that William Shakespeare doesn't exist because Hamlet couldn't find him in his attic or in his basement. And what we can take from that is that we live in a different realm to this God who created us. This Christian God of which the Christian Bible speaks exists primarily in another realm to us. And in the same way that it would not be possible for Hamlet or Romeo and Juliet or Othello or any of these guys to ever have encountered William Shakespeare, it's simply not viable and possible or logical for us to encounter God in that same way. In fact, the only way that Hamlet couldn't even know that William Shakespeare existed is if William Shakespeare wrote himself into the story. He would have to write himself into the story and introduce himself to Hamlet. And funnily enough, that's exactly what the God of the Bible did for us. He wrote himself into our story. He stepped from his realm into our realm as a person, the person of Jesus Christ. And that's why the Bible is so important, because it documents in human history those events, the events that led up to the incarnation of God as a person, which is depicted in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and a lot of the things that happened after that too, in the formation and the growth of the early church. So the Bible provides really important historical evidence for God's writing of himself into the narrative of human history. In addition to that, as Andrew has written extensively on, and as I'm sure we'll take some questions on, in addition to that historical evidence that the Bible provides, there's also a lot of propositional evidence. There are arguments from design, arguments from biology, arguments from morality, arguments from cosmology, arguments from ontology, arguments from anthropology, arguments from archaeology, and the list goes on and on and on. So to that historical evidence, we also find propositional evidence. But there is a third category of evidence that Andrew and I want to be really, really clear today that we don't forget about, and that's relational evidence. Because when God wrote himself into our story, when he wrote himself into human history through the person of Jesus Christ, he didn't just do it so that we could learn about him. He didn't just do it so we could study and explore him propositionally. He did it so ultimately we could find all of that evidence, but it would lead us into a relationship with him. And so the Christian message is not just about finding the evidence for God in human history or finding the evidence of God in propositional terms. It's about finding a transformational relationship with God in an up-close and personal way. And that's both the beauty and the uniqueness of the Christian message. It's not just about propositional evidence. It's not just something to believe in. It's someone to be in an up-close and personal relationship with. Not just to understand propositionally, but to be transformed by relationally.
Powerful stuff as usual from our dear brother here, Max. Thank you so much, Max, for sharing that. So right, without taking too much time, let us go straight into questions as we see that some questions have come in. So first question for I guess, Max and Andrew, you will decide who will take the questions as we read it out to you, okay? So the first one would be this: how can the Bible be reliable, as it contains so much stories which are so detailed and mostly first-hand information known to the writers?
I might just say something very briefly, and then Andrew can add to it. I think, funnily enough, as a lawyer, some of the most powerful kinds of evidence come from eyewitness testimony. And so the fact that the biographies of Jesus Christ, and in the Christian Bible we have 4 deeply reliable eyewitness-based biographies of Jesus. We call them the Gospels, but they're really just 4 biographical accounts of the life of Jesus from either directly written by the people very, very close to him who experienced these events, or written by people who had direct access to the people who lived these events with Jesus. And so eyewitness testimony is actually a very, very powerful and an entirely admissible category of evidence in all of our legal systems. The question is not so much that these are stories from first-hand information. The question about testing credibility is really more about, do these stories fit with each other when you cross-reference them and cross-examine them alongside one another? Andrew is a very gifted academic, and in academia, there is this process called peer review, and the system of peer review and peer citation is really the way that we determine whether academics are credible or not. It stops, people claiming to be academics, claiming to be qualified, and coming up with crazy theories based on false data, false evidence, and falsifying claims. And so peer review is quite important. And interestingly, in the Bible, when you go through all 66 books in the Bible, because remember, the Bible is written by more than 40 different people over 1,500 years in 66 different books. When you go through them and you look verse by verse at how many occurrences are there in the Bible of one part of the Bible coherently and cohesively cross-referencing another part of the Bible by verse, between chapters, and between books, there are more than 60,000 instances of internal peer review and citation within the Bible itself. So the cross-referencing capacity of the Bible to kind of hold itself together is incredibly powerful. And then on top of that, of course, there is this process of textual criticism and archaeological evidence and various other things outside of the Bible that we can apply to it to test. But those are just some thoughts. I'll hand it over to Andrew if he's got something to add to that.
Yeah, thanks, Max. So actually, I'm not very sure I understood the question, because it says so detailed and mostly firsthand. I thought that firsthand should be one of the consideration for why it's reliable, right? I mean, it's not here.
Right.
Yeah, it comes from people who actually witnessed this, right? And when people witness these events and they wrote down in detail, and this detail can be cross-checked with each other. And in fact, this is an indication that it is reliable. One of the indication, right? And in addition to the points that Max has already said, I mean, so there are multiple reasons why the Bible is reliable. Max has mentioned peer review and archaeological reliability, and then the fact that it is much of it is from firsthand. Although there are some which is from secondhand, but much of it is actually from firsthand, and that is so detailed, and we also need to know that this is the New Testament especially, right, is written very early, right, during when most of the eyewitnesses are still alive, right? So these people who actually seen Jesus, they witness his resurrection, the empty tomb, these people can still be verified, right, when this is written, right? And so this is again very important, right? Compared, say, for example, with the Quran, which says something about Jesus. So the Quran says that Jesus never said that he's God, for example, right? But the Quran is written 600 years after Jesus, right? It wasn't written during the time of the eyewitnesses, when people who have actually heard Jesus, heard Jesus spoke, right? Those people were no longer around, right, when the Quran was written. And so the Quran has no historian trust the Quran when it comes to what the Quran says about Jesus, for example, right? But many historians would argue that the New Testament does contain this eyewitnesses' testimony, right, about what Jesus actually said and did. Right? And so this is again another important consideration for why the New Testament is reliable when it comes to talking about Jesus' resurrection and his claims, for example. And then there's one more point which we also need to note is that many of these Christians, right, early Christians who wrote the Bible, right, they gave up their lives for their faith, right, and they are in the position to verify what they wrote is true or not, right. And so this is something that they actually witness. They can check with one another, and they are willing to die for it, right. So again, if this is something that they made up, right, they wouldn't have been willing to sacrifice their lives for it, right. I mean, yeah. So many people will be willing to die for what they think is true, even though that may not be true. But you won't find many people who are willing to die for what they know is false, right? And so so this is another consideration, right, for why the Bible is reliable. So it's not just one consideration. I mean, when we examine the reliability of any ancient document, right, it's not just one or two considerations. We have to consider a whole range of factors, right? And so we find that all these factors, when it comes to the Bible, all this fits together, right? And it consolidate each other, right? And therefore, we have good reasons to believe that what the Bible says is true.
Thank you, gentlemen. Yes, I'm always so convinced, whenever I dive into this evidence, to support the reliability of the Bible, the scriptures. Yeah, it really does. It's just insurmountable, in my opinion. So let's move on. We have a second question there. If there are so many writers in the Bible, how can I trust its consistency?
Well, I think similarly to the first one, just going on from what Andrew was saying and what I shared earlier, it's because there are so many writers that you can trust its consistency. If it just had one author, then there would be no objective point of reference. There'd be no frame against which to test that author against anyone else. They could have just completely made it up. But the fact that we are talking about well over 40 different authors across 1,500 years, across 3 continents in multiple languages that wrote this Bible, the vast majority of which never knew each other, never met each other. The fact that it all fits together, the fact that it all coheres so perfectly, the fact that we have more than 60,000 examples of cohesive cross-referencing, that in itself, I think, points to the truth value and the legitimacy. So I would suggest that it's because there are so many writers that you can trust its consistency. If one person came and told me something that was a bit difficult to believe, then I might take it or leave it. But if 40 different people came and told me the same thing and I trusted them and they were each proven credible separately, and they had never met each other and never knew each other, and they'd all claimed to have witnessed the same event or the same series of events, and the narrative arc fitted together, that would, for me, hold far more legitimacy. Andrew, you have anything to add to that?
No, I don't think I have anything to add to that. Yeah, let's move on to the next question.
Yeah. What's next, KY?
A very popular topic. If God is loving, why does he want me to go through suffering?
Why don't you go first on this one, Andrew?
Now, I think there are many things that that we can learn through suffering. So in fact, many of the greatest thinkers, right, throughout history, whether they are from the East or from the West, they agree that suffering can work out for good, right? So for example, in the Eastern culture, right, people like Mencius, right, Mengzi, right, he says that 天降大任于斯人也，必须劳其筋骨，通达其身, etc. What basically what it means is that that before heaven gives a person a great task, right, the heaven will let the person go through suffering to mold the character, right, so that the person can handle great things, right, for the future. So if God allows suffering, then we know that it must be for some good purpose, right? And God can work all things out for good, right? So one amazing story, right, is the story of Joseph in the Bible, right? I remember, right? So we know that Joseph, right, he went through a lot of suffering, right? So a lot of people, his brothers betrayed him, right? And his boss betrayed, Potiphar's wife, got him into trouble. So all people hurt him, right? So he went through a lot of suffering. But in the end, we see that actually God has a plan, right, behind all this, and we see how God worked things out, for good. Even when other people try to harm you, but if you are in the plan of God, right, so God can work all things out for good. So I think there's a lot to be said about this, right? But the most important thing is to make sure that we are in the plan of God, right? That we surrender our lives to Him, that we commit ourselves to Him, no matter what happens. I think that is important. And when we think about the story of Job, actually, there's also a lot to be learned from the story of Job, right? So when we read the story of Job, so why did God let Job went through suffering? Well, because the devil was saying that, well, the devil said to God, right? So, the devil said that, the reason why Job honored God is because God has blessed Job with so many things, right? But if you take all these things away, right, Job will curse you, right? So that was what the devil is saying. So the devil is questioning the ground of Job's devotion to God, right? And so God allowed Job to go through this testing, right, as a vindication of his character, right? So that people can see that the reason why Job trusted God is not because of the things that God gave to him, right, but because God is God, right? So the grounds of his devotion, right, is not because of things that God gave, but because God is God, and therefore Job honors God, right? And and so this is a vindication of Job's character, and it glorifies God in that way. And through this whole process, we also see that Job actually drawn closer to God, right? And so we need to understand that. So when we answer, so in order to answer this question, I think we need to ask ourselves, what is the highest good, right? What is the greatest good in our lives? And what is the meaning of life, right? In order to understand why God allows suffering, we need to understand what is the meaning of life first. And if we think about this, right, what is the meaning of life? So in life, the most important thing is relationships, right? Just now, Max mentioned relationship. Relationship, that's so important. And the most important relationship is our relationship with the one who created us, right? God, right? Because he is the source of all goodness, right? So to draw close to God, right? To have a close, that is the meaning of life, right? And that's where you find ultimate fulfillment and joy, and satisfaction. And so, when God allows suffering, it can actually work out for good. It can help us draw closer to God, and that is another purpose why God allows suffering. Yeah. Max, you want to add to that?
Look, not really. I mean, you said it so comprehensively. The only tiny thing I would say is, exactly as Andrew said, lots of the suffering, God uses it in our lives in ways that brings about some semblance of redemption or restoration or purpose. But sometimes he doesn't. And when he doesn't, he asks us to trust him. He's very upfront that he's very clear that we're not going to understand all of the suffering that we go through, and we're not going to understand all of the suffering that we see. He says to trust him. The good question to then ask of God is, on what basis can we trust you? And he never asks us to trust him blindly, because to that question, on what basis can we trust you, God, with this suffering that we don't understand? God gives us himself. This is a God who came into our world and suffered for us, and now is willing to suffer with us. This is the God who suffered and a God who suffers. So he is eminently qualified to ask for our trust, because at the cross of Jesus Christ, we see a God who's willing to suffer for his people. He's willing to actually take on suffering, all of human suffering, and defeat it and do away with it. And then in a relational way, as Andrew said, offer us the two things that we're looking for. Through relationship, offer us comfort and strength within the suffering, and an eternal hope and future beyond the suffering. So I think that's an important thing for us to remember as well, in addition to everything that's already been said. But as Andrew said, there's plenty that could be said about this topic, but those are some things from both of us to think about.
Thank you both. Wonderful answers and great answers. Let me just apologize to those of you who just joined. I'm so sorry for if you have been trying. I know you've been trying to get in and you couldn't get in. There was a problem with Zoom. We have an account for up to 500 attendance, I guess, but we do not know what happened. They have limited us to 100, and a lot of people have been praying, and praise God, now it has been opened back for us. So we're seeing people are now coming in. So really, much deep apologies to all of you for keeping you waiting and, just not being able to come in. I know it's frustrating. All right, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your patience, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're just going through the Q&A right now. We are just taking the third questions. There's plenty of time. So may I remind all of you, please do send in your questions. Remember, this is Ask Anything session. Please just send in your questions that you may have for Andrew or Max, okay? Over to the next question. How can I believe in a God whom I cannot see?
Okay, I will take that first. So, many people have difficulties believing God because they cannot see God, right? But actually, when we think about science, we also know that there are many things that science talks about that we cannot see. So, for example, we cannot see quantum particles, right? We cannot see electrons, but we know that those things exist, right? Because of the effects they cause. Right? So, if there's no electrons, if there's no quantum particles, we won't be able to use our handphones or electricity, for example, right? So, what this shows is that we can, based on, what this shows is that we can infer those things that we cannot see based on what we can see, right? So by looking at the effects of electricity, for example, right, we are able to infer that electrons exist, even though we cannot see electrons, right? So likewise, by looking at the universe, we can infer that the universe must have come from a creator, right? I mean, the universe, where does it come from? Why are there laws of nature, right? when we think about this, right, we can infer that these things couldn't have come about by chance. There must be a first cause behind all this, and there must be a creator which brought all this into existence. Right? So based on examining what we can see, when we look at the universe, we can see lots of evidence and signs that it is the work of a creator, right? And one of the clearest evidence is the laws of nature themselves. Right? When we examine the laws of nature, we see that that there is a high degree of ordering, right, in the laws of nature, which can be expressed in wonderful, elegant mathematical equations. Right? So, for example, E equals mc squared. Right? Now, where did that come from? Why is it E equals mc squared? Right? Energy equals mass times speed of light squared. Right? So we know that that a lot of people think of it as Einstein's theory of relativity. Right? So a lot of people associate that equation with Einstein, but actually, if you think about it, Einstein was not the one who created E equals mc squared, right? He only discovered it, right? Before Einstein discovered this, the universe has already been working according to E equals mc squared, right? So Einstein did not create E equals mc squared. Einstein only discovered this, right? So who is it that put it there, right? All these amazing equations that we study in science, right? So if it's just a random process that brought about our universe, right, it won't result in this high degree of ordering which the scientists discovered. And so the fact that we do see this high degree of ordering, right, in the physical universe is an indication, right, that this is the work of an intelligent designer, a creator, who brought the universe into existence. So even though we cannot see God himself, but looking at the universe, we can infer, right, that it must be caused by an intelligent creator. Yeah. So that's my answer to this question.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, Andrew. I think, as Andrew started off by saying, there are so many things that I believe in the existence of that I can't see. I believe in the existence of wind. I believe in the existence of Andrew Loke's thoughts and ideas. I believe in the existence of electricity. I can't see any of those things. Why do I believe in them? Because I can see and sensorially feel their manifestation in my world with my senses. So I can't see those things as such. I can't see the wind. I can't see his thoughts, but they do manifest in my world and I can see and experience them. In the same way, the person of Jesus Christ, the being of God, the love of Jesus can be experienced and felt as he manifests himself in our real world, in our tangible world. And Andrew gave great examples of how that happens in our natural environment. That can happen in our metaphysical environment too. Experiencing the love of God, Christian love made practical in the lives of other people, the strength that he gives to people through suffering, the companionship that he provides to people as you walk in relationship with him. It's very much a category error to say that we only believe in things that we can see with our eyes. So yeah, great question. And Andrew really nailed that.
Wonderful. It's great to have both of you, shouldering these questions together and giving us a different perspective, I would say, to each of these questions. Right, next we have I believe, quite a good question here. I do not believe in fatalism. I believe that there are consequences for my choices, and I have the free will to choose. If an all-loving God does not want any person to perish, and when God knows the end from the beginning, why doesn't he influence my choices? Great question.
Shall I have a go first, Andrew, and then hand it over to you?
Sure, yeah, you go first. Yeah.
Okay, great. It is a great question. I wonder whether you were predestined to ask that question or not. Look, I think if we're going to be honest and take the Bible seriously, and going to be serious about the Bible that we've spent so much time early on in this event defending, it's quite clear from the Bible that God is all sovereign and all powerful. It's also very clear in the Bible that, at least on some level, human beings have been given the dignity of freedom and choice. We are moral agents, and as you correctly say, our choices do matter. And that can seem like a contradiction. My submission to you is that it is not a contradiction, even if it might seem like that. And there's lots and lots that could be said about this, but very, very quickly, and then I'll hand it over to Andrew. One helpful way to think about this is that the reason God's sovereignty and power can operate alongside human freedom is that neither of them are necessarily operating all of the time at their full capacity in a logical sense. So while God is all sovereign and all powerful, he's not always exercising all of his power all of the time. He controls that. He guides it. He channels it. He's very sophisticated and nuanced in how he exercises his power. And so we know that because in the Bible, just like in the real world, things happen that God doesn't like, right? Things happen that God doesn't like, which means that even though he has all sovereign power and almighty power, he's not constantly exercising all of that power all of the time. In the same way, humans are given the dignity of freedom. We are moral agents. We are relational beings. We are made for, as Andrew said, relationship with God and relationship with one another. Because of that, there must be an element of freedom in our choices, but we don't have unlimited, unfettered freedom. Our freedom and our choices are necessarily limited by our circumstances, our age, our intellect, our environment, the people that we meet, the families that we are born into, the economic resources that we have. I'm 5'6". I would like to think that if I had complete freedom, I'd be playing in the NBA at the moment, but I wasn't free to do that. And God can control all of those things. He has sovereign control, so he can control the circumstances in which we find ourselves, the environments in which we live our lives, the culture and family into which we're born, and so forth. So both of these things, in a highly, highly complex way and sophisticated way, can very rationally coexist with one another. And so it's quite possible and likely, if the Bible is true, which I believe that it is, that both of these things can coexist, God's sovereignty and our freedom. The final thing I'll say is that, because this question does get onto what does God know from the beginning and why doesn't he control things more? First of all, I think he does influence choices. I think he does have the capacity and power to influence choices, either by his Holy Spirit, by thoughts in our minds, by seeking to influence our hearts, by speaking to us through other people, through his Bible, and so forth. But there is a difference between foreknowledge and control. There is a difference between foreknowledge and control. So I know that the sun is going to rise tomorrow, but I'm not controlling that. I don't decide where it's going to rise. Now, God, of course, could decide and does decide when a lot of things happen and how they happen, but he doesn't have to. He doesn't always choose to use all of his power all of the time. It's a very big question. Those are just a few thoughts. Andrew, over to you.
Thanks, Max. As Max emphasized just now, he rightly pointed out that the reason, the most important thing, right, that God created us for, right, is a relationship, right, with Him, and this relationship must be something that is freely chosen, right. Otherwise, it'll be meaningless, right. So if God just create robots, right, which can be determined, influenced, and determined by Him, whatever way He likes, then that will have no real meaning and no real morality as well, right? So for example, right, if I can program I can influence my laptop, right? I can program it such that every morning when I open the laptop, it says I love you, I love you, I love you. But that's not real love, right? I mean, the computer is being programmed by me, and the computer won't have any moral value, right? Because it's just being programmed to do so. And so, in order for moral value and love to exist, right, and for real meaning and significance to exist, right, the human beings must be given significant free will, right? And so this also implies that humans can choose to reject God, right, if they want to do so, right? And God allows, right? God is part of God's permissive will, right, to allow this to happen. And so we need to distinguish between the different aspects of God's will. I think it's also very important to know that, right? So when we think about the will of God, right, we can think about God's desirative will. God's desire is everyone. Is that he doesn't desire people to perish, right? So this is God's desire, right? But on the other hand, there's also God's permissive will, right? So God permits, given that God's highest priority, right, is to create human beings with significant freedom, right? And God honors that, right? Because God wants to create a valuable and meaningful and significant world with humans being given human beings with free will. So given that this is God's priority for what He creates, He permits, right? He allows people to make choices, right? Even if that goes against God's desirative will, right? I mean, we know that happens very often, right? And that's the reason why we see so much evil in this world, right? So the presence of sin and evil is not God's desirative will, right? God doesn't desire people to do evil, right? God doesn't desire people to sin, right? But God allows people, right, to sin, to do evil, right? God allows that, right? It's part of the big picture, right, of the grand design of why He created humans in the first place, right? Because He wants to create a morally significant world where people can choose good or evil, right? So given that is the case, God permits, right, people to make their choices. And as Max emphasized just now, God doesn't use all His power all the time, right, to force people to go along the way that He wants, right? because if God does that, then the world will be meaningless, as I said, right? You'll be like, all of us will be like puppets, right, or robots, right, being controlled by God, and that kind of world wouldn't be meaningful, and real love wouldn't exist in that kind of world, right? So God give you freedom, and God give me freedom, and I pray that all of us we will make the best out of it, right? That we will freely choose, right, to love God. And I think that's what we should do. And given that we know that God loves us first, right? I mean, God loves us so much that He sent His Son Jesus to die, to sacrifice Himself for us to save us, right? And how can we not love a God like that, right? He deserves our response, right? That we should love Him. And when we do that, we will find the real meaning and significance in life, right? And we can be with Him forever, right? Because He sent His Son Jesus to die to save us, right? So let us respond, right, positively to Him, right, to His love, and enter into a love relationship with Him.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Max. Again, great answers. Great answers. Again, apologies to those of you who just joined and having trouble to log in earlier. It was due to a technical problem with Zoom, and they have limited us to 100 when we had a much bigger account than that. So sincere apologies to all of you. Okay, so we are right now in the midst of the Q&A, taking the next question for our speakers to answer. In the marketplace, which is neutral to all religion, how does one present the gospel of Jesus Christ without being seen as a fanatic or as one who is trying to convert? Great question.
Yeah, look, I guess I'll just give you 4 very quick steps. This is actually a whole nother talk, another session that we run sometimes, but here are 4 things that you can do now if you're in the marketplace and want to do this. The first thing is prayer. Pray for people in your workspace. Pray for your company, pray for your managers, pray for your colleagues that you're working with, that you want to come to know Jesus and want to explore, and that you want to have explore deeper meaning in their life. The second thing is relationship. Just build authentic relationships of trust with people, authentic friendships. The Bible has a very clear commission to go and love our neighbor as ourselves. It has a separate commission to go and make disciples of all nations. So we shouldn't get those blurred. We're not called to go and meet people and make friends exclusively for the purpose of making them Christian. We're actually called to go and love them just for the sake of loving them, because they are made in God's image and they are worthy of love as an end in itself for them. So invest in those friendships and relationships, and just build authentic friendships of trust with your colleagues. Thirdly, when the opportunity opens up, and it will open up if you're praying for it, share your story. Share your story about why you're a Christian and what God means to you, and maybe something He's done in your life, or maybe why what you were doing when you decided to become a Christian and what drove that decision. And fourthly, meet them where they are and respond to their questions. Everyone's got questions. The Christians have questions, non-Christians have questions, and because you're praying for them and you're journeying with them in authentic friendships, you will find out pretty quickly what their questions are, what their objections are. You'll find out what's standing in between them and a decision to respond to that offer of relationship that Andrew mentioned, that God is offering everyone. And then do the best you can to equip yourself, come to events like this, read books, check out YouTube, and come alongside them and help them with the questions that they have. So prayer, relationship, your story, and their questions. That's a quick 4-step summary.
Yeah, those are great answers. I don't have anything to add to that.
Thank you, Max. Yes, fantastic answer. I agree with Andrew there. Next question for you. Why are most scientists so adamant that God does not exist? Has there been any scientific proof that God does not exist? I guess, Andrew, this is right up your alleyway.
Okay, so let me answer this. Now, one reason why, actually, no, first of all, the assumption, I think, is it can be challenged, right? So
yeah,
the questioner is assuming that most scientists don't believe that God doesn't exist, but actually it's not quite true. When we look at the history of science, for example, right, we'll see that many of the greatest scientists do believe in God, right? In fact, many of them are Bible believers, right? So, for example, Copernicus, Kepler, Newton. I mean, Newton, his theology is a bit weird, but he is a Bible believer. He does believe in God, right? And then Michael Faraday. So many of the greatest scientists throughout history, and even today, we see many great scientists that believe in God as well, right? So so in fact, many of the Nobel Prize winners are in fact Christians, if you check it out, right? So it is not quite true that most scientists don't believe in God. I think that assumption is not quite correct, right? Nevertheless, right, there are quite a number of scientists who don't believe in God. It may not be the majority, but nowadays we do see quite a number of scientists who don't believe in God. And one reason why is because so I'm thinking of people like Richard Dawkins or Stephen Hawking, right? So they don't believe in God, right? And one reason why they don't is because now there is a historical backdrop to this, and let me explain a bit, right? So by the end of the 19th century, the various disciplines that people study in universities have become very subspecialized, right? So before that, right, people study science, they study philosophy, they study history, and even scientists, many of them know quite a bit about philosophy as well. So I'm thinking of people like Newton, for example, right? He also, he doesn't just study science, right? He also knows quite a bit about philosophy. In fact, science was known as natural philosophy, right? So people tend to be more broad-minded in that sense, right? But after the 19th century, the disciplines in the universities become more and more subspecialized, such that by this time in the 21st century, many scientists they don't know quite a bit. They don't know much about philosophy actually. So so recently, before he died, Stephen Hawking claimed that philosophy is dead. Right? But actually, he speaks out of ignorance, right? Because he criticized philosophy, but he doesn't know what he's criticizing. In fact, Stephen Hawking, his own views commit a lot of logical fallacies. And one logical fallacies in Hawking's thinking is what is known as scientism, right? So the problem is not science, but scientism, right? So 科学主义, right? And scientism is the view that science is the only or the best way to know reality, right? That is what it means, right? Scientism claims that science is the only way to know reality or the best way to know reality. But actually, this scientism is not science. Scientism itself is a philosophical view about science and reality, right? Scientism claims that science is the best way or the only way to know reality. So it is a scientism is not science itself, right? It's a philosophical view about science and reality, right? And so it is self-defeating in that way. And moreover, science itself requires philosophy, right? So what is science, right? So science involves coming out of hypothesis, and which is at least in principle testable in some ways, right? And testability, hypothesis construction. This requires, this methodology requires the laws of logic, right, and the principle of induction, and the justification of the laws of logic and induction, for example. These are philosophical, right? So science is built on philosophical foundations, the principles of reasoning, right? Which those are philosophical. But a lot of scientists ignore this. A lot of scientists are not aware of this, actually. They have ignored their assumptions, right? Because nowadays many scientists are actually ignoring our philosophy, actually. And because of this, because their mind have become so narrow-minded, right? And they just focus on what they can experiment. And when they think that, okay, I cannot prove that God exists or doesn't exist in the test tube, therefore I don't believe that there's a God, right? I mean that's a very narrow way of thinking. As if we can only verify some, as if only things that we can verify in the lab or whatever, like it's only that kind of things exist. I mean that is nonsense. So in fact, if we go back to the logic of reasoning, right, which I explained just now, right, where did the laws of nature come from, for example, right? I mean, this is a question that science itself cannot answer, actually. I mean, science can discover these laws of nature, right? But science cannot explain why is it that these laws of nature, why is it that the laws of nature are what they are, or why is it so, right? So the why question is something that science cannot answer, and actually you need philosophical reasoning, right, to deduce, to infer that to answer this question. And if you apply philosophical reasoning, you will find that actually there are good reasons to think that the laws of nature themselves actually come from a first cause, a creator of the universe, which I explained just now, right? And the other issue is also the issue of miracle. The one reason why many scientists, quite a number of scientists, they don't believe in God is because they don't believe, they think that miracles such as the resurrection of Jesus, they think that these are violation of laws of nature, this cannot happen. But we have already answered this the last time when I talked about the historical argument for the resurrection of Jesus. In fact, it is a mistake to think that miracle is a violation of the laws of nature. So let me give an example, right? If I let go of this, it will drop, right? This is the law of nature, right? The law of gravity. Now, if I hold on to this key, am I violating the laws of nature? Well, no, because the law is still there, right? The gravity is still there. The reason why this does not drop is because there is something intervening, right? There's a cause that prevents this from dropping. And that's why it does not drop, right? Now, if God exists and if God hold on to this, right, it'll be a miracle, right? If God hold on to this key, it'll be a miracle. Now, is it a violation of laws of nature? No, again, no, because the law is still there. The reason why this does not drop is because there's something intervening, right? There's a cause outside of nature that intervenes, right? So it is a mistake to think that miracles is a violation of laws of nature. In fact, miracle is not a violation of laws of nature. Miracle is an event that is caused by something outside of nature. That is what a miracle is. Now, again, this is a philosophical reasoning, right? But many scientists are very simple-minded. Many atheist scientists, they think that because I believe in science, I believe in laws of nature, therefore I don't believe in miracle. I mean, that is what Stephen Hawking says, even though he's such a clever man, but he makes such a simple logical fallacy like this, right? And so, so these are the reasons why they don't believe in God. But as I already explained, those reasons are not valid, right? When we think about it logically, carefully, we will find that God exists. It's reasonable to believe that God exists. We will find that miracles are possible, and when we look at the historical evidence, we in fact have good historical evidence to show that the miracle of Jesus' resurrection did happen in history, right? We have talked about this in our previous session. And so we have good reasons to believe that God exists, and this God has intervened, right, in history by raising Jesus from the dead to prove that he's God. Yeah. Okay, that's all. Yeah. Over to you, Max.
That was fantastic, bro. You're the expert in that space. So I'm going to leave that one with you.
Absolutely, yes. All right, let's move on to the next question. Okay, the punishment commensurate with the crime. The penalty for sinners is eternal condemnation. How are the sufferings of Christ equivalent to eternal condemnation if his sufferings were temporal and just a short episode in human history?
This is a really great question, and it goes to the heart of the cross, really. It goes to the heart of the cross. First of all, we just have to be very careful when we say things like the punishment is commensurate with the crime. Commensurate based on whose opinion, commensurate based on what objective standard, commensurate based on, the information that we have as questioners, we have as believers, or God has as someone who has access to all of the information. But I think the heart of the cross does shed a lot of light on this question. The reason why the cross had to happen for God to restore us to relationship with him is that God is a God of love, right? He's a God of relationship, and that's because of his essential characteristic as a God of love. But that's not his only essential characteristic. He has other essential characteristics too. One of them is that he's a God of justice. Now, God can't violate his own characteristics. He can't violate himself. And so he made these free beings, as Andrew unpacked for us earlier. He made these free beings, humankind, whom he wanted to be in loving relationship with himself and in loving relationship with one another. And because of that, he had to give them, at least on some level, and in some sense, an element of freedom to make the choice to enter that relationship. But because of that freedom, we turned away from him. We wanted control of our own lives. We took him off his throne as the God of our lives and our creator, and we severed that relationship, right? So now, because of this sinfulness, because of this going astray, this brokenness of humankind, God now has a dilemma. And the dilemma is this: as a God of love, he wants to reach out to us and wants to draw us back into relationship with him. But because he's a God of justice, he can't just ignore our brokenness, our sinfulness, our rejection, right? Because our moral imperfection here and God's moral perfection can't mix. It's like oil and water. It's cosmically incompatible, if you like. Because of our imperfection, God's perfection and our imperfection can't assimilate. They can't relate. They can't cohere with one another. So for him to just forgive, and some people say, why doesn't he just forgive if he's such a forgiving God? Well, the problem is he'd have to violate his essential characteristic as a God of justice. He'd be upholding his essence as a God of love, but violating as a God of justice. Now, what about if he just upheld his characteristic as a God of justice and he actually gave us the punishment that we deserve, which would be separation from him, to actually cut us off, which is what we deserve? Well, then he'd be upholding his heart as a God of justice, but he'd be then in violation of his heart as a God of love. So what does he do? He does the most incredible thing. He steps into the world as a person, takes on all of the brokenness, all of the sin, all of the hatred, all of the evil, all of the suffering onto himself, and does away with it. And in doing so, brings together perfect love and perfect justice. He upholds his heart as a God of love because he now gives us a pathway back into relationship with him. He also upholds the reality of his heart as a God of justice because he doesn't just ignore us, and he doesn't ignore the reality of his moral perfection seeking to relate to our moral imperfection. So both fundamental essences in his heart are upheld. Now, the reason that it had to be Jesus Christ, God incarnate, is that if it was just another person, and now I'm getting to relating to the question, if it was just a person that took on the punishment, it wouldn't have been adequate as a substitution. God substituted himself to take our punishment, which was separation from God. If it was just another person, then it would have just substituted for one other person. So it had to be God on that cross. It had to be God on that cross because no individual human in their own humanity would have been an adequate substitute for all of humankind. At the same time, if it was only God on that cross, then it wouldn't have been a substitute. So it had to be human as well. And that's why the incarnation of Jesus Christ is such an incredible thing. The incarnation of God as Jesus. Perfectly God, perfectly human. Entirely God, entirely human at the same time. That's what actually brings the cross to life. The reason that it's eternal is because we were made in the image of God. We were made as eternal beings. God is an eternal being, and we were made as eternal beings. And the relationship that God seeks with you and I is an eternal relationship. And so to reject an eternal being is actually not a temporal sin. It's an eternal sin, but that's why it has eternal consequences. And that's why eternal separation from God requires it requires a commitment at some point to step into that relationship. Now, it's always going to require that commitment because, as Andrew said earlier, we have to make a decision to be in relationship. That has to happen in a space-time continuum. There has to be a point at which we make that decision to step into that relationship or to reject that relationship. And God's given us the term of our natural life to make that decision for that relationship. But the decision we make, whichever way we make it, has eternal consequences. I hope that helps a little bit. Andrew, would you like to add something?
Yeah, thanks, Max. So Max rightly emphasized, right, the importance of the incarnation, and so let me add something to that. Now, first of all, so the assumption is that the punishment is commensurate with the crime, right? And we need to understand that the crime against God, right, is not just any simple crime, right? So we need to understand that the seriousness of the crime is related to the one that we sin against, right? The one whom we did something wrong, right? The one whom we wrong against, right? So, for example, if I slap my dog, right, at the face, right? So I did something wrong to my dog, right? And that's a crime, right? Animal abuse, right? And I deserve to be punished for that, right? But if I slapped the Queen Elizabeth, right, that will be a more serious crime, right? Because when I slap, if I have a chance, right, if I get to slap Queen Elizabeth, right, that will be a more serious offense than slapping my dog, right? Because the Queen represents her whole nation, right? So that will be a great insult, and I deserve to be punished more severely, right? So what this illustrates is that the severity of the punishment should be related to the one whom we wrong against, right? Now, what if we did something wrong against God, right? What if we reject God, right, who has done so much for us, right, and given us salvation, right? I mean, and God is the infinite one, right? As Max talked about just now, he's the eternal one, the infinite one. So the sin against God, right, is no ordinary crime, right? That is sinning against God, right, is offending God, right, is something that is infinitely serious, right? And that is why it deserves an infinite punishment, right, eternal punishment. In fact, the crime is so serious that only God himself can pay for it. None of us can pay for our sin against God, right? Because all of us are finite. We can never pay back what we owe God, right? The wrong that we have done against God, we can never fully repay that. And that is the reason why, in order for our salvation to be possible, God has to come down, right? God has to take up the human nature in the person of Jesus Christ. That's why the incarnation is essential for our salvation. And in fact, if you look at all the religions, only Christianity teach that, right? No other religions teach this kind of salvation, right? All other religions says that you have to try your best to save yourself, right? You have to do good deeds, right, to try to redeem yourself. But the problem is, none of us can redeem ourselves, because no matter how much we try, we all fall short of the perfect standard that God requires. And no matter how much we try, we can never repay what we owe God, right? Because our offense against Him is infinite, of infinite seriousness, right? That none of us can pay back what we owe God. And therefore, the only way that we can be saved, the only way for us to be redeemed, right, is for God Himself, right, to come down and save us, to die and sacrifice Himself for our sins, right, for what our sins deserve, right? And for Jesus to die on the cross, right, he doesn't have to die, He doesn't have to suffer eternally, right? So the second part of the question is, given that Jesus only suffered a short time, right, how can that save everyone? Well, the reason why that can save everyone is because the one who suffered is of infinite value, right? He is God Himself who suffered, right? Because God is infinite, and therefore He can take up all the sins of everyone upon Himself, and He doesn't have to suffer infinitely, right? He doesn't have to suffer eternally. He just has to suffer for a period of time, and that is enough because He is infinite, right? And so he himself, right, is already sufficient, right, to take up all the sins of Himself, and therefore that is already infinite, right? And so He doesn't have to suffer infinitely, right, or eternally, right, in order to pay for all our sins. And that's why Jesus only had to suffer for a few hours, and to show that He suffered, right, for us, and that is enough, right, to take all our sins upon Himself. And that's the only way, right, of salvation for all of us. And that's the only way how we can be saved, right? Yeah. And that's why Jesus is the only answer, right? The only way to salvation.
Oh, thank you so much, both of you, Andrew and Max. Really enjoying both of all the answers that you've provided so far. Again, I believe that this coming in from a different perspective and different angle, and I believe all of us are truly blessed by this. We're going to go into a short break right now. I believe that all of you agree that they have really taken us through a very frantic pace, and it's only fair for them to take a short break. But while they are taking their break, I'm very pleased to introduce to you a special guest and dear friend to you tonight. He is Richard General, a French citizen living in Hong Kong since 2007. Now, I've known Richard and his wife, Paulina, for some time now, as we both attend ICA. But recently, I discovered some amazing facts about him. Let me introduce him properly. He's currently a group CFO for an international logistic company. He has over 20 years of experience in the financial field, truly highly accomplished in the corporate world. But though he's highly accomplished in the corporate world, he's also a wonderful Christian brother. He working and serving in many capacities, as you can see in ICA. He's a kingdom group leader, a man ministry head, a zone pastor, and I believe he's also serving on the missions committee of the church. Truly a man who's wearing many hats and truly enjoying to serve the Lord very much. But tonight, I'm inviting him to share about another of his many talents and gifts, baking. Yes, you heard me right, baking. Richard is a highly skilled baker and has been making videos to teach how to bake traditional French pastries, cakes, and other delicacies as a form of ministry. Let's watch a short clip of his video quickly before we have him on.
Hi everybody, Leoma! Thanks Pastor Peter for the great teaching today. Evangelism is God's calling for the body of Christ, the church, and all the believers. God provides us all the resources we need to do this work. When we evangelize, God is with us. Today, we will bake one of the most famous size-bite French pastry, the macaron. It's easy to do. Come, let's bake. These are the ingredients that we need. In a bowl, combine the almond powder and the icing sugar and mix well. In a separate bowl, beat the egg whites until soft peaks form. Add the sugar, add the vanilla extract. Continue to beat the egg whites until stiff peaks form. Add the almond powder mixture in 3 times. Gently fold it with a spatula until combined. Add gel food coloring in and mix until just combined. Transfer batter to a piping bag fitted with a round tip. Pipe onto a baking paper in 3 cm circle. Allow to sit for 1 hour so the macarons form a skin. Bake the macarons in a preheated oven at 150 degrees for 15 minutes. Take it out, allow to cool completely.
Wow. You know, I can tell you firsthand that the cake not only looks great, it tastes super delicious. He's such a talented baker and such an amazing, skill set that he has. Richard, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, KY, for inviting me and allow me to share my testimony.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Yes, I know there's a very interesting story behind your baking skills, and that's, which you have shared with me, because you have somewhat of a rich and storied family history that stretches over 100 years and many generations. Is that right? Could you share a bit about that?
Yes, correct, KY. In fact, my family ran a bakery in a small village in France for 4 generations. My uncle took over from my grandpa, and now it's his son, my cousin, who continued to run the bakery. The passion and the technique were taught from generation to generation. In the countryside, the role of the baker is an essential part of the community life. They also help to deliver medicine and other essential items to those who might have difficulty to travel and to the store, such as elderly people. Bakers, especially ones who do the delivery, like my family, because they live in the countryside, meet countless people from different walks of life and bring joy to both families and people who live more secluded lifestyle.
That's amazing. It's amazing. I think I have never met someone who has such a rich history of, baking history like yours. You are, you might may use the term, royalty in that sense. Yeah. So when did you first bake or discovered your penchant for baking?
In fact, when I was young, we visited my uncle, and I enjoy spending time with him in the bakery. He will bring me there, and I will be able to prepare bread and pastry. And I will really experiment different type of pastry. And it's where I make the statement that, in fact, it's with the right instruction and practice that anyone can bake. But what is most important is that I grew up not just taught to bake, but also to have a baker outlook. Being with my uncle, I understand that we can show love he was showing love through his bread, kindness through the delivery of the bread, and generosity through helping anyone who needs help. And now in my life, I try to maintain this throughout these things in me.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's so good that, through this, you managed to pick up, some very, I would say, very good qualities from, just watching your uncle baking, isn't it?
Yes.
And using those principles in your life today, and greatly, I'm sure that influenced your walk as a Christian, very much.
Yes.
So, but what is really interesting is also that you're currently using this baking skill to sort of start a baking ministry as such. What makes you do that?
In fact, the first time we decided with my wife, Paulina, to make a baking video is when we share with our church ICA for the Good Friday service in last April. We had communion during the service, and we wanted to encourage people to prepare their own unleavened bread for the communion. And due to COVID-19, we decided to create a baking video every week. And the aim of this video is to encourage and provide another opportunity for positive families activities at home, especially during the confinement and the social distancing, while reflecting and discussing the Sunday sermon, so bringing the Word of God in the same time. And in fact, since we start this video, it has been 27 weeks. We already proposed 27 recipes, and most important for us is that we bring many family experiences, and we are glad that it has blessed Kingdom Group members and families through our video. And I thank you, KY, for trying one of my recipes. I saw the result, and you are also a great baker.
That must be truly, you know, I would say, you know, amazing compliment coming from you, you know. I know Paulina is your wife, lovely wife, is there as well, you know. First you can just, you know, just say hi to us.
She's coming very quickly.
Blessed to have both of you on as well. Hi, Paulina. Good to see you. Good to see
Without
you.
Paulina, the video won't exist. So she's an essential stone in this ministry.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time tonight, okay? You know, many of us have talent and gifts, right? And have our ability to exert influence in our respective spheres of our circles. It's great to see how Richard is using his to bless so many around him. You know, if you like his videos and his recipes, please watch out for our emails or reach out to us and we will send you the links for sure. You will be amazed at how tasty they are. These are truly traditional pastries made by, I would say, you know, it's a great heritage, you know, rich heritage of over the 100 years, you know, of French baking right there for you. So don't miss this, all right? So thank you again, Richard. Right.
Thank you, KY.
Let's get back to part 2 of our session tonight. So we will now play the second video by Max, entitled Science and God.
We're often told that we have to choose between God and science, between putting our trust and faith in the existence of God and putting our trust and faith in the scientific process. The problem with this, of course, is that it's based on a false dichotomy. When we more closely and carefully consider the nature of science, the nature of God, and the nature of our lived experience in reality, it's clear that not only are God and science not incompatible, but they're perfectly coherent, complementary, and consistent with each other. In fact, a University of Washington study found that of the 52 most prominent and influential scientists responsible for pioneering the Copernican scientific revolution, 48 of the 52 were Christians, beginning with and including Copernicus himself. And this intellectual consistency between the validity of the scientific process and the reality of God's existence make perfect sense when we consider that science is concerned with observing and understanding and cataloguing the natural physical world. That's why the sciences that we know are called the physical sciences, chemistry, physics, biology, whereas God exists primarily in the metaphysical. And so with science exclusively focused on the physical and God primarily existing in the metaphysical, it would make sense that science can never conclusively prove or disprove the existence of God. In fact, there is no way in the physical world we would even know of God's existence unless and until he actually involved himself from the metaphysical in the natural physical world. And that's exactly what he did when he came into the world as a person, Jesus Christ. So we see that with science focused exclusively on the physical and God existing primarily in the metaphysical, clearly they're not mutually contradictory. In fact, they're not contradictory at all. No more than the existence of the iPhone and the reality of Steve Jobs are inconsistent, and no more than the existence of the internal combustion engine and the reality of Henry Ford are inconsistent. The iPhone and the combustion engine, they're the creation, they're the mechanism. Henry Ford and Steve Jobs, they're the creators, they're the agents that sit behind the mechanism. So it is with God's creation, which can be understood by science, and God himself, who's the agent that sits behind that creation. God and science are clearly not mutually exclusive. Not only that, they actually help us by explaining each other. If you want to know more, check out the video at this link by my friend and colleague, Professor John Lennox, and connect with us online for more opportunities to have your questions answered, for video responses, and for online forum discussions.
Thank you, Max. That was the really well-made video. Wouldn't you agree? Again, if you guys, you want access to these videos, we will send the link to you right after the talk so that you can have access to the videos and also the questions that comes with it for your small group discussion and for your church use. I can tell you from firsthand, it's great material that you will love to have to share with those around you. All right. So let's just dive into the next question. If you don't, as we are mindful of the time. Yeah. So, right. Can we say relational evidence is also experiential evidence? We experience God's love, joy, peace, etc.
Yeah, I guess this is from my sharing earlier, so I'll just briefly say a few words and then Andrew can add if he'd like. Certainly, there's an extent to which there's significant overlap between the relational and the experiential. But I think the uniqueness of the Christian message, so in short answer to the question, absolutely right. Relational evidence is certainly a category of experience. But there is something unique about the Christian message because it manifests in a relationship with God himself. So there are experiences you can have as an atheist, there are experiences you can have in various other worldviews, but the fact that the Christian message manifests in an up-close and personal relationship with God himself is what makes it unique. The fact that we can actually relate to God through the person of Jesus, we can walk with him, and yes, we do experience that, but it's the fact that it is relational, that is intimate, that it is up close, that it is personal, and that we aren't just being asked to believe in something because we feel something, or believe in something because we see the propositional evidence, or believe in something because a book says so. All of those things point inferentially and inductively, as Andrew said earlier, to the reality of the Christian message. But once we take that step into the relationship, that's when we begin to walk in a much more powerfully experiential way. I could tell you all night long about the existence of my wife. I could show you photos of her. I could point to my wedding ring. I could show you her driver's license. All of these things are propositional evidences of her existence. But if I just brought her to you and she introduced herself to you, that would be far more powerful. It wouldn't make the propositional stuff any less important or relevant, but the best way to find out if this Jesus exists is to actually step into a relationship with him and find out for yourself. Different people, there are those from everyone on this Zoom webinar. Some of us require a lot of evidence propositionally, historically. Some of us are just ready to step into that relationship straight away. And that's fine. For those of us who need the evidence is there. But the most important thing is that evidence is not where it ends. That evidence is where the relationship begins. Once you step into a relationship of living, loving faith with the person of Jesus, it just overwhelms you experientially, as the questioner kind of indicates.
Yes, you can just pray and open your life to Jesus, right? Let him come into your life and you will be able to experience the peace, the love that you have always wanted to have.
Powerful answers. Thank you so much, Max. Right, next question. Bear with me, it's a bit long. I think Max's argument is great for big questions, for academics and for intellectual discussion, etc. For laymen, I want to hear their views on how to answer a typical question below. Why does a nice Muslim, peaceful and treating everybody nice, will end up in hell? Well, Christian like me will use Romans 3:23 to answer that. We are all sinners, thus we need salvation. But these people will not buy this concept at all. What I do is to pray for the intervention of the Holy Spirit. Question is, how else can we explain in an intellectual sense of apologetics so that these people, so that they can understand and concur?
I guess because it refers to me, I'll very quickly share. I think the presupposition or the assumption underlying the question, or the questioner who leads this questioner to ask the question, is that the problem that we have is that we are not nice, or we are not peaceful, or we are not good. The problem we have is one of moral performance. And so if someone does morally perform, then the outcome of that moral performance should be heaven, or should be some kind of reward. And so I think the way to explain it is that our problem is not moral performance. Our problem is not that we are bad people that need to become good. Yeah, if that was the problem, then Christianity wouldn't really have a unique offering, because we could point to all of the self-improvement, self-help, personal development systems and theories and strategies, and all of the other world religions as well, for that matter, that are all out there giving us ways to make ourselves better. The reason that the Christian message is unique and the reason that it transcends this idea of performance and moral performance is that it is not that we need Jesus or we need this Christian message to be good. The point is that we recognize that we can never be good in our own strength in the context of God's infinite and perfect goodness. We can never be good. Doesn't matter how peaceful we are or try to be, or how nice, or how many old ladies we help across the road, or how many puppies we hug, or how many donations we make to charity. Our moral imperfection, our intrinsic brokenness and moral imperfection can simply never be transformed to reach God's perfection. And so the problem is not that we are bad and need making better. The problem is that we are dead in our sins. We are dead to God, and we need to be brought back to life. My mentor Ravi used to say it all the time. Jesus didn't come to make bad people good. He came to make dead people live. He didn't come to make bad people good. He came to make dead people live. And so it's an ontological transformation that we require. That's why the cross of Jesus Christ is essential and the Christian message is unique. If it was just a question of moral performance, that we could just try hard and do better, then that would be fine. You wouldn't need Christianity. You wouldn't need Christianity at all. There'd be a number of other ways to morally perform better. But we know the reality of who we are. It's not just about what we do. The problem is actually who we are. We're ontologically broken, not just deficient in moral performance. So we need an ontological transformation. We need to be raised back to life spiritually from our deadness. I hope that's helpful. And only Jesus can offer that transformation. He can actually take us from being dead and bring us to life. And that's what Jesus talks about when he meets with Nicodemus in the Gospel of John, when he says, you've got to be born again. Nicodemus comes there seeking answers. He thinks Jesus is a teacher from God, come to give him ideas and truths about how he can be a better person and how he can teach the Jewish people to be better. What he misunderstood is that his problem is not one of not having enough education and not having enough moral performance. His problem is that he is dead to God in his sins. He is dead because of who he is ontologically, not because of what he does morally. And so Jesus is not a teacher from God. Jesus is literally God himself, that agent of catalytic transformation that can bring him back to life. And that's why Nicodemus doesn't understand. How can someone be born again? What does that even mean? Jesus is saying, the first time we were all born, we were messed up. It wasn't done right. So it's quite an offensive and a confronting thing to say. And so Nicodemus tries to make sense of this logically, and he doesn't understand how it can happen. How it can happen is through the person who is sitting across the table from him, Jesus Christ, who can actually bring about that transformation. And he's sitting across the table from each of us tonight, right here as we're sitting listening to this webinar. Hope that's a little bit helpful.
Fantastic answer, Max. Thank you so much for that. Right. Next question. Are not Christians being arrogant or superior to others if they claim that they hold the truth?
Yeah, Max, you can answer. I think you give a talk on this, right?
I did give a talk on this. I think the short answer is that the question is often posed, aren't Christians arrogant and exclusive, or isn't Christianity arrogant and exclusive? The short answer, and there's plenty that could be said, I think my talk's probably online, but the short answer is it can't be arrogant if it's true, and it can't be exclusive if it's for everyone. That's the short answer. Because we're not claiming that this truth is of us or even from us, and we're not even claiming to hold it for ourselves. We're just claiming to know Jesus. Because for us, the truth is not propositional primarily. The truth is relational. It's a person. Secondarily, it is propositional. But no one accused anyone of being arrogant if what they were saying was true. You know, I'm 5'6", right? Many would say that's nothing to be arrogant about. But if I said to you, in a room full of people who are 4 feet tall, I'm 5'6", that would not be arrogant because I am 5'6". So the bigger question is not so much whether Christianity seems arrogant. The question is it true? That's why nights like tonight and this series is so important, because asking whether or not something's arrogant is not really relevant, right? Asking whether it's true or not, that matters. And the other thing that comes alongside is it exclusive? Well, it's only exclusive if it excludes people, but Christianity is for everyone. The offer of relationship that Andrew and I have been talking about, that God extends to you and me, is extended to all of humankind. It can't be arrogant if it's true, and it can't be exclusive if it's for everyone.
That's a great answer. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's a fantastic answer. Sorry, I was just looking at some of the looking at some of the questions to sort out the next one for you. So, how do we present the gospel to our loved ones who are not open to Christianity? Practical question, I guess.
Next. Okay.
Oh, you want me to have, okay, sure. I feel like I'm talking a lot. Look, I think it gets back to, I think, some of the principles I talked about being a witness for the Christian message in the marketplace. That goes for our loved ones as well, very much so. So I think that the first thing that we should be doing is praying for our loved ones, is praying that their hearts would be softened and their minds would be opened. That's the most important thing I think you can do for a loved one or for anyone that you want to see come to know Jesus. Secondly, invest in your relationship with them. Invest in your relationship with them. Now, with loved ones, I think this is where this gets more interesting and more challenging and more effective than in the marketplace, because we have such close connections with our loved ones. We see so much of them. We've seen them at their worst, and they've seen us at our worst and at our best as well. Now, someone once told me that there are 5 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and the Christian. And for those of you who are not Christian on the call, we just refer to the first 4 biographies of Jesus's life in the New Testament as the Gospels. Gospel just means good news. But the fact that the Christian is the 5th one, the 5th biographical account, at least in the 3rd person, of the person of Jesus. And what I mean by that is that for people who are not open to Christianity, or perhaps haven't even opened a Bible or refuse to come to church, if you are a Christian in that family, you might be the first and best access to the person of Jesus Christ that these loved ones get. You need to be Jesus in their life. You need to, effectively and with integrity represent the Christian message to them. And a lot of that is not going to be about how well you answer their questions or how much you know or how well you can argue. It's going to be about how well you love them, how well you embody the love of Jesus. And this might sound a bit contested and confrontational, but what we need to be doing is out loving people, because we have access to a love that is not from us. So this is not an arrogant thing to say. It's just the love of God that's channeled out through us. And so you need to pour out that supernatural, countercultural love onto your loved ones to the point where they are just mesmerized by this love, because it's literally out of this world. In one of the Avengers movies, Thor has come to fight the bad guys on Earth. And this is, I think it's the first Thor movie, so the one that's just called Thor. And this is the first look at Thor that human beings are getting. And those of you who are fans will know that Thor has a hammer, and that's how he channels his power. All of the lightning and all of the thunder and all of his power comes through his hammer. And the human beings are a bit confused about which one's Thor, which one's the good guy, which one's the bad guy, because they're all from out of this world. And so they come with their megaphone, the FBI director and the army and the generals, and they say, it looks to us like you are using unregistered technology, right? In a kind of a classical, kind of Eastern procedural systematic way. They're like, look, it seems like you're using unregistered technology when he's using his hammer. As Christians, you have access to unregistered love technology. This is technology that the world doesn't understand, and it is incapable of duplicating. It's never seen anything like it from within human strength. The only place it comes from is from the heart of God. It comes through Christians very often, but it comes from the heart of God. So your job is to pour out that unregistered love technology that is so mesmerizing and mind-blowing into the lives of your loved ones. Even when they're being difficult, even when the natural human response would be to respond in a different way, you are called to pour out that supernatural love in that moment. That is so countercultural that one day when they give their lives to Jesus and someone says to them, which argument was it that got you? Which piece of evidence was it that got you? They will probably say, I just had this brother. I just had this cousin. I just had this mother or father that was just so irritatingly loving and amazing for so long. It just got to a point where I had to have what they had. I had to have what they had. As loved ones in your life, you have close enough access and intimate enough relationships with them to pour out the supernatural love of Jesus in a way that is actually evangelistic and apologetic in how you exercise it. And the final thing, of course, which I think is less important but still very important, is to come alongside them and help them with their questions as you would with anyone. Come alongside them and help them with their questions. Invite them along to things like this. Share books with them. But most importantly, invest in your relationship and make sure that they experience the love of Jesus through you. That's the most powerful thing you can do. Love is the greatest apologetic. And secondarily, use real apologetics. That's the second greatest apologetic. The reasons, the arguments, maybe some of the things that Andrew and I have said tonight, hopefully as well. Thanks for the question.
Fantastic answer. Very well answered, Max. Thank you so much for that. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so sorry that we have exceeded our time that we originally allocated. Please bear with us. I need to take the liberty of your time a little bit longer. We have at least only about 3 to 4 questions left. Okay, I hope you don't mind. Due to the technical issues earlier, we are running short of time. All right. So next question quickly. How can a person who is offended by a Christian ever get saved? An example is the quote by Gandhi: "I like your Christ, I do not like your Christians. Your Christians are so unlike your Christ." Whether this quote was true or not, a lot of people will never accept Christ. Perhaps because I guess they were stumbled by a Christian before. Who would like to have a go?
Okay, so let me answer this quickly, and then Max can add on. Yeah. So yeah, this is one difficulty that a lot of people face, right? Because they have some bad experiences with the church or Christians, and that's why that make them want to stay away from Christ. But however, when these people, when they reflect on their own lives, right? When they ask themselves deep questions like what is the meaning of life, right? Where am I going after I die? How can I find peace for myself? At the end of the day, right? If they think deeply about these questions, and if they want to seek out the answers to these questions, and if they were willing, right, to consider these different worldviews objectively, if they really want to seek, right? Eventually they will still find, actually, right? Because the Bible says, "Seek and you shall find," right? And if they really think about these questions, then at the end of the day, they will find that actually there's no other answers other than Jesus Christ, right? Even though they have all these bad experiences, but they still have needs which they would want to find answers for, right? For themselves. And if they're willing to seek, and they're willing to humble themselves, right? To humble themselves and to honestly ponder about these big questions, they'll find that at the end of the day, it is still Jesus Christ who can really answer their deep questions, right? And I have students like this in my class, right? Some of them have bad experiences in church with Christians, but at the end, they still came to believe in Jesus, because at the end of the day, they still find that, well, Jesus is Christianity, Jesus Christ. Christianity is the most reasonable answer, and that's the only answer that can answer their deep questions and that can save them, right? Yeah.
Max, do you have anything to add?
No. I think that was a really good answer by Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew. Right, next. Some people choose Buddhism over Christianity because they think Buddhism is a peaceful religion, as no wars have been fought by Buddhists on Buddhism, whereas Christians fought the Muslim in the crusade. How do you address this? This is actually a very good question, because it's asked by many of our friends and colleagues.
I'm just gonna tell you, I smile because it's actually very serious, but I smile because this question probably comes up a lot, but it's probably the first time I'm actually hearing it. So I will just tell you a little bit of my story, and that's why I will respectfully completely disagree with the assumptions under the question. I'm sure there are other examples, but I'm a Sri Lankan Tamil, which is an ethnic group, and I'm from the north of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is a majority Buddhist nation. It always has been, it continues to be. And for a long time, Tamils, who are primarily religiously Hindu, are a minority. I think it's around 8 to 10% of the country. And my family and I were literally chased out of the country. Our home was burnt down. My family members were assaulted. Family relatives of ours were killed in a civil war. And that war was driven in large part by the very ideology that the question here refers to. So I don't accept for a second. What you will actually see as a student of political science and political history that I studied is that when you go through history, people of every worldview have been responsible for war and have been responsible for massacre and have been responsible for the degradation and abuse of the dignity of other people. The problem is not a Christian problem. It's not a problem with this particular worldview or the others that are in the question. It's not even an atheist problem. It's a human problem. It's a human problem. War is a human problem. Evil is a human problem. Oppression and racial discrimination is a human problem. Rape is a human problem. Assault is a human problem. And what the message of Jesus Christ does is it addresses it at a human level. It actually recognizes that human beings are fundamentally and ontologically broken. We're all messed up. Every other worldview on some level says, just do this and you'll be okay. You need to dig down deep inside yourself and lift yourself up and you'll be okay. Follow these rituals, follow these ethical principles, follow these steps, believe in these precepts. Christianity says, no. Jesus Christ turns up and he says, you can do as much as you like in your own strength. It's never going to work because you're ontologically dead in your transgressions. You're dead in your ontological brokenness. You need transformation. So it's not a question of being better or looking at which people have messed up. You will find people of every worldview that have committed horrific and horrendous crimes against humanity. The question is, what is the worldview out there that is putting forward a narrative of redemption and restoration and transformation that addresses the brokenness of humanity? The brokenness of humanity is very, very evident and clear. Where is the worldview that addresses and provides a means through which humankind can be redeemed and transformed? And that we find only at the cross of Jesus Christ.
That's a powerful, I believe, very exhaustive answer as well. How do we be a witness in culturally relevant ways?
I've got a couple of thoughts, Andrew, and then please add. My very short contribution to this answer is remain culturally relevant in what you're taking in. So it's not a question of, do we just read the Bible and nothing else? Or do we just read the newspapers and watch Netflix and read The Economist and nothing else? The thing is to read both of them, but to be very clear that you are reading the rest of the world through the frame of the Bible. So the Bible almost forms, the Christian worldview forms an integrative and an integrated lens through which you understand the rest of the world. But you've got to stay culturally relevant. You've got to be reading what non-Christians are reading. You've got to read books written by both Christians and non-Christians. We have to get out of our echo chamber. If all your friends are Christian, that's problematic. If all the books on your shelf are by Christian authors, that's problematic. If you have no idea what people in your community, in your family, in your workplace are reading, watching, listening to, that's problematic. You've got to be culturally relevant. Paul in Acts 17, he went to Athens and he did three incredible things. He went to the synagogue and explained the gospel of Jesus through the Jewish scriptures. Then he went to the marketplace and he explained it through the concepts of the marketplace. Then he went to the Areopagus, the university, and he gave a TED talk and explained it through the concepts of the Greek and Roman philosophers. Everywhere he went, he spoke the lingo and the language and the accent that they spoke and understood, but he gave the exact same message of Jesus Christ. That's what we have to learn to do.
Yep, I agree. Yeah, Acts chapter 17 is a great example. We need to learn the great spiritual principles that are taught there, and get ourselves equipped in apologetics, right? Yeah, attend more courses with RZIM, with HKCCA,
That's right.
and that will help you to be culturally relevant.
Yeah.
Great answers, both of you. And I believe Andrew has also just answered the next question as well. One of them that's just been posted. I'm really mindful of the time. I'm so sorry that we don't have time for everything. Some of the questions do overlap, and I did not post it here, so please forgive me. But I believe the answers to some of the other earlier questions have already covered those as well. Yeah. So this will be the final one. I guess it's quite a personal one as well. So why people that believe in God seems to suffer the most than those people that don't?
Well, I'm not sure whether it is true that people who believe in God seems to suffer than people who don't. I'm not sure, but maybe you are suffering. I don't know. Perhaps the person who is asking this question is really suffering a lot. But I don't think there's a way to actually to say that I suffer more than other person, because this is something, suffering is something, it involves some subjectivity, right? So so I'm not sure this can be quantified in that sense, but it is true that believers do suffer, and I have already explained just now why would God allow Christians to suffer. But if you're suffering right now, you can just tell God about your suffering, right? You can pour your heart out to God, right? About your suffering, and God cares for you. God knows about your suffering. God cares for you, and He is with you, and He also wants us, right, to walk alongside each other in suffering, right? So I think the body of Christ is what God intends us for us, right, to walk alongside people who suffer. And so if you know someone who is suffering, very often the person, what he or she needs is not really apologetics, but a friend, right, who is willing to walk alongside the person, right, to go through this process. And no matter how severe our suffering is, right, we know that at the end of the day, that there is hope for us, right? And that is something that what people who don't believe in God will not have, right? So for us Christians, we have this hope which non-Christians do not have, right? And this hope is real, right? Because it's grounded in the death and suffering of Jesus Christ, and the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, right? Because Jesus is alive, right? He overcome death, right? And so no matter how much suffering we go through, right, we know that at the end of the day, right, He's going to work all things out, right, for our good. And because of that, right, we can have hope, right? And we should stay close to Jesus, right, to draw close to Him, and to and we, by doing that, right, we'll be able to experience God's best purpose for us, right, in the midst of suffering.
Yeah. I think that's a really, really well put, Andrew. And I'm kind of glad that this is our last question, because I think you're right, Andrew. I think whomever is behind this question, you're obviously going through something. So we just really want you to know that you're not alone. And I think that's the beauty and the life-changing joy of walking with Jesus. When you do suffer, you don't have to go through it alone. And there is hope beyond it, and there is comfort and strength within it. And the Bible is very honest and upfront about that. It never promises that a life with Jesus will have no suffering. In fact, it does promise, because of the brokenness of us and our separation from God and the brokenness of our world, that suffering is guaranteed. But what it promises us, if we're walking with Jesus, is that we are more than conquerors through the suffering. It doesn't say we're going to conquer by avoiding the suffering. The fact that you're conquering something means there has to be something to conquer, right? And so we are conquerors because Jesus takes your hand and will walk through the suffering with you. The author of Psalm 23 says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you are with me. Now, it doesn't say I won't walk through the valley of the shadow of death. It says it's going to happen. There are going to be valleys. There are going to be struggles and storms like what you're going through now. But when you're with Jesus, it's just a shadow. And so, as someone wrote, would you rather be hit by a car or by the shadow of a car? It's not to say that the shadow is still not dark and difficult, but when you're with Jesus, it's the valley of the shadow of death. We never have to walk through the actual death, the actual worst of suffering, because we have, as Andrew said, a hope beyond it, and we have a comfort and strength within it. And so when you're in the storms of life and the suffering of life on your boat, and the boat seems so small and you're taking in water and you don't know what to do, which happens to Christians as much as it does to others, the difference is that you have Jesus Christ in your boat. And when He is in your boat, one of two things will always happen if you reach out to Him. He will either calm the storm, so He will end the suffering, or the storm will continue and He will calm you. One of those two things is guaranteed. He will either calm the storm or He will calm you, or He will do both. And that's why the Bible promises us again and again and again, a life lived with Jesus is not necessarily meant to be easy. The Bible never says that, but it is meant to be amazing. It does promise that. And that's the fulfillment and the flourishing and the peace and the hope and the joy that Andrew and I have been talking about. And so if that's you and you're going through suffering, we just encourage you to reach out to Jesus, to reconnect with Him, to reinvest in that relationship. And if you're suffering and you've never known that hope and that comfort and that strength, we just encourage you to make that decision, step into that relationship. God's been waiting for you. It's not a surprise to Him that you're searching. He's only just one prayer away, and He's waiting with open arms and an open heart. But thanks so much for having both of us. We've been really blessed by your questions. We hope this has been useful for you. And Andrew, thank you, brother. It's been a pleasure working alongside you.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's a pleasure as well.
Thank you both, Max and Andrew, for spending this time with us and carefully articulating, crafting such wonderful answers for us. Not only have we heard, all the strong reasons that we have for believing in Christ, but it leads us to a God that is loving. It leads us to a hope that is eternal, and that is really the joy, and I hope that it will give you the peace and the comfort, as you are on this, if you're on the journey of faith. And hopefully that you will join us more for our talks, and so that you can also be encouraged along the way as well. I want to thank both Max and Andrew again one more time, just join me in thanking them for just spending so much of their time, in preparation, as well as just, today as well, just joining us here as well. I want to thank all of you who joined this tonight. Again, sincere apologies for the technical problem that we experienced. We will endeavor to do better next time, and hopefully we will not face it again in the future. Okay. I also want to thank my fellow committee members who are all volunteers who helped me to put this talk together. Without them, we wouldn't be able to organize this talk. That's all. There are Joyce, Grace, Katrina, and Yvonne. Thank you so much, guys. Reminder for our next talk by Abdu Murray on Monday, November the 9th. All right, the science of faith, the faith of science and the science of faith, finding harmony in a false conflict. Please join us.